Hello there, boys and girls, and moms and dads, and grandmas and grandpas. Great to see you all again. It's Pastor Mark, and I'm glad to have another time to be able to share with you one of my favorite Easter books that I shared with my kids when they were younger, and just go through this most wonderful story of Easter from Peter's perspective. And of course, that book is called Peter's First Easter, and again, it's written by Wangerin Jr., and it's illustrated by Timothy Timothy Ladwig. And we've come now to the final two chapters of the book. If you remember, we've been following Peter's story of Easter all the way from when he was with Jesus and the other friends of Jesus in the upper room for Jesus' Last Supper, and they've after that gone out to the Mount of Olives, where Judas kissed Jesus and he was arrested after being handed over by him. And Peter has followed along to the high priest's courtyard, where he denied even knowing Jesus 3 times, and he felt horrible about that. And then he was following Jesus as he went to different places to be on trial with these different leaders. And then just last time we were with Peter and with Jesus on Mount Golgotha after he was with Pilate, and we saw how Jesus died and was buried, and just how very, very sad Peter felt about all that. And now we come from the saddest part of the story to the most happy part of the story as we come to the end. And we'll be reading those chapters in just a moment. And as I remind you each time we've been together, I want you to think about what Peter is feeling as he goes through the story, what he's seeing, what he's hearing, how he's feeling in his heart. And I want you to imagine that you're right there with Peter and the others in that story too. So we continue our story today looking at chapters 9 and 10, and we begin with chapter 9, which is called Sunday morning, which is the Sunday after Jesus died and was buried in the tomb. So let's read the final part of Peter's first Easter. Sunday morning. Peter says, "For me, Saturday was a dead and dreadful day. One by one, all the disciples snuck back to the upper room where we had eaten with Jesus on Thursday, all but Judas. We locked the door and blew out the candles so no one could tell we were there. We were scared. We had hoped that Jesus was the Redeemer of Israel, but he had died. All our hopes had died too. We didn't eat, we didn't talk. We sat in sadness and in darkness, all alone. Then someone started to bang on the door. I thought the soldiers had come, until the person hollered, 'Peter! Peter!' It was a woman's voice. 'Go away!' I shouted. 'Peter, open the door! It's me, Mary Magdalene!' I cracked the door. Light burst into the room. Why, it was Sunday morning, but I said, 'Hush, woman, the soldiers will hear you.' 'Oh, Peter, you donkey,' Mary laughed. She was with Jesus, with James' mother and Joanna and Salome. They were all laughing. 'The angels,' they cried, 'have sent us with messages. Oh, Peter, come out. Come and see what we have seen.' Mary pulled me down the steps and made me run through the city with her. 'We went to the tomb,' she said, 'to rub oils on Jesus' body, but when we got there, the stone was rolled away. And the tomb was empty, Peter, and we were so scared. But there was an angel, and he told us not to be afraid. And he said, "You're looking for Jesus, but he isn't here. He is risen, just as he promised." Mary burst out laughing again and ran ahead of me all the way to the tomb. "Look inside," she said. I did. I saw the linen cloth lying by itself, but nothing else. No body was here either, living or dead. So what was I supposed to think? I stood up, more scared than ever. Mary said, Peter, don't you remember his promise that he would rise again on the third day? I pushed her out of my way and ran as fast as I could to the upper room again. I slammed the door and locked it. Mary was a fool, and I was scared, because if our enemies would steal the body of Jesus, it would surely kill us, too. When the evening came, Thomas said that at least we ought to eat something. So we went out to find some food. Well, we argued about whether to light a lamp at all. All at once, Jesus was in the room with us. He frightened us. We all backed away. He said, "Peace be with you." And that made things worse. This is a ghost that could talk. But then he did 3 things. He opened his hands and showed us the scars from the spikes. He sang the beautiful words again, almost as if they were a lullaby. Peace be with you. And he smiled at us. He smiled like in the olden days, but he smiled in a new way too, like the morning sun at the beginning of the world. John started to giggle. James swatted his leg and laughed out loud. Soon all the disciples were laughing till the tears ran down their cheeks. So glad were they to see the Lord. Yes, it was the third day. Yes, he had risen from the dead. He said, just as the Father sent me into the world, I am sending you. Go out and do my work. Then he came near and breathed on each one of us and said, receive the Holy Spirit. The sins you forgive, they are forgiven. Well, not all the disciples laughed. For one, Thomas wasn't even there. And when the others told him what had happened, he wouldn't believe them until Jesus came back again 1 week later to prove to Thomas that he was really and truly alive. And for another, me. I could not laugh with the others because I didn't know what Jesus thought of me now. I was the one, you see, who had sworn that he had never even seen Jesus. I was so afraid for my own life, and I denied him 3 times. I was so glad that he was alive again, and I never stopped loving him. But I didn't laugh. I hid behind James and John. You could see Jesus showing his hands to his disciples. You could see the friends of Jesus there, James and John in the front, and can you see right behind them, Peter kind of ducking out of sight. There he is. Well, that's the end of chapter 9, and just want you to think about, again, what Peter must have been thinking, both right after Jesus died, when he was in the tomb, and then when he went with Mary Magdalene to the grave and found that it was empty, with just the grave clothes in there, and no Jesus at all. I wonder what you'd have thought had you been with Mary to see what that grave looked like. And I wonder how Peter felt. I wonder how you would have felt had you been in that upper room and then suddenly Jesus is right there in the room with you and he's alive. How would you feel then? Well, with that, let's go on to the final chapter, to chapter 10, which is called Fishing and Forgiveness. Peter goes on. Here now is the last part and the best part of my story. After we saw Jesus in the upper room, many of us traveled back to Galilee, where we used to live. Then just yesterday afternoon, I said I was going fishing. It's the job we used to do before Jesus came to us and said, "Follow me," and became his disciples. So James, John, Thomas, and 4 more men went with me to the seashore. In the evening, we sailed out on the water and began to cast our nets. It wasn't a good trip. We spent the whole night casting, but by early this morning, we had caught exactly nothing. Then someone called from shore, "Children, do you have something to eat?" "No," I shouted back. yanking my nets in for the last time. "Tell you what," the man called, "cast your nets on the right side of the boat and see what happens." Right side, left side, what's the difference? I grumbled. What did that amateur think he was? We did this for a living. But John, who is forever cheerful these days, called out, "Okay," and obeyed the stranger. Well, as soon as John's net hit water, so many fish jumped in that they began to drag the whole boat down. "Peter," John's eyes were sparkling. "Don't you know who that is?" "Who?" "It's the Lord." Sometimes my feelings are so strong I act before I think. The Lord? I jumped in the water and swam to shore. Yes, it was the Lord, and he had a fire burning. He said, "Help me bring the fish in and let's eat." I did. In that single catch this morning, we landed 153 fish. A happy day. We took several of the best fish and cleaned them and broiled them and then lay down in the grass to eat them. This time, my eating did not keep me from noticing Jesus' face. I think I took maybe one bite before I saw that he was not eating, just like the last time. But the difference was he was staring straight at me and no one else. Oh, my face burned like fire then, and the fish stuck in my throat. I could not chew. I could not swallow. I hung my head, scarcely breathing. After a while, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He didn't call me by my special name. I didn't look up at him. I whispered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said, "Feed my lambs." He didn't say anything for almost a minute, but he kept looking at me, and I kept looking down at the ground. Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" I whispered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said, "Tend my sheep." No one was eating now. I was shaking. When Jesus spoke again, the tears spilled down my eyes. "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" 3 times. It was the same number of times that I had denied him. That's why I was crying now. "Lord, you know all things," I said so softly that maybe he couldn't hear me. "You know that I love you." Well, when I had said that, Jesus leaned over and put his arms around me and hugged me so tight that I burst into boo-hoos, crying like a little baby, crying for happiness, for sheer, pure happiness. He lifted me up and put me on my feet. He gazed into my eyes, and he gave me a job to do for him for the rest of my life. Jesus said, "Feed my sheep." That's what happened just this morning. And I have run as fast as I can to tell you the good news. Jesus has forgiven me. 3 times I hurt him, and he took the hurt, and he went down to death with it. When he rose from the dead, the hurt was gone. And when I was so sorry for what I did, he came and loved me 3 times back again. And now I have so much of his love that I can love you just like Jesus. Forgiveness. We are both forgiven. How do I know? Well, when we were done eating, Jesus smiled and said the very same thing he said when he first called me. "Peter," he said. "Peter, you know, his big stone. Peter," he said, "follow me." Sometimes my feelings are so strong that I talk before I think. "Yes," I cried. "Oh, Jesus, I will follow you forever. So boys and girls, that's the end of chapter 10. It's the end of the story of Peter's first Easter. And again, I want you to think about what would you have felt had you been with Peter, had you been Peter in that boat with no fish, and then have this stranger tell you how to fish, and then you have all those fish in your boat, and you find out it's Jesus, and then you have that breakfast time with him, and he asks you those 3 times, Simon, do you love me? How would that have made you feel? And how would you feel knowing that Jesus had forgiven you for those 3 times when you said you didn't even know him or meet him? Well, boys and girls, this is such a special story, and I wanted to share it with you because it really tells the most important story that we could ever know and that we could ever share. I hope it's been a great blessing to you to hear it, and I want you to know too, we're done with this book, but we've got a couple more weeks yet before we'll be able probably to come back to church again, and so I'd like to read another book, and I will let you know what that is when we get together next week again. But hope to do some sort of special book again, and it's been very good to be with you again, and I want to remind you once more that Jesus loves you, and that he is always with you. I look forward to seeing you soon. Bye-bye.